let's just go through what I think are sort of the basic objectives of this talk, right? I want you guys to be able to articulate the idea that there is a sort of a new expanded vision of what we like to think of as Excel, and that there are these capabilities that it has now that really are starting to differentiate it a lot from the Excel that I knew 8 or 9 years ago when I was in finance, working as a Microsoft finance guy. The second point, though, is that I want you guys to be able to walk away from this talk being able to identify a couple of the things that are actually sort of driving that transformation. And we're going to weave a lot of these things together around the use of this device because I think that it really does help us envision this. And then the third thing, of course, is to be able to sort of tell real-world stories. I'll actually be showing you this real-world story using the device. I'll probably also tell you a few things along the way. So there are, in fact, these new things that people are doing with Excel because I think it represents this language that many of us speak when we go to work that's super, super familiar, right? The interesting thing about Excel when you talk about, for example, an IoT device is not just, oh, it's Bill Gates' favorite program, or at least at one point he said that it was, right? It's that what's really interesting about it is that somebody actually has this idea that this very new technology can be transcribed into this language that's super familiar, this language of Excel, right? So let's go through, I think, 3 steps here in this talk. The first step is just to sort of talk about the basics, right? How many people today are using add-ins in Excel in this audience? So about a third, right? And you're probably using, I guess I would say, COM add-ins, traditional add-ins. These are modern add-ins that we're talking about, add-ins that are web-based, that are built to run with Office 365. So I want to make sure that we all sort of know, like level set what it is that the technology does. So there's sort of 4 characteristics that I would say actually, help you identify what I would say a modern add-in looks like. The first thing that is that it's built using web technology, right? So JavaScript or some version of Java is typically what you are using to create these add-ins. And because they're written essentially as web add-ins with a manifest, they'll wind up, once you've built them, running anywhere. They really actually are, when I say run everywhere, what I really mean is they're cross-platform. I mean that you can actually build a device that or build a solution that runs on a Mac, that runs on a web browser or in the native client, that runs on a phone of your choice, but it's always going to run essentially the same way. And it's actually kind of an interesting story that when I did the first of these talks in Berlin, we had a bug in the code, because a lot of what I'm going to show you guys is very much in beta, so it's sort of what's coming next. We had a bug in the code, and we couldn't get the demos here that I'm going to run today to run on any of our PCs. So we actually ran the whole presentation on a Mac, just as a way of saying essentially that, okay, by accident, we are now showing you guys that this truly is a cross-platform experience. And just as a side note to that, at the end of the talk, about 10 people came up and took pictures of me standing in front of a Mac doing a Microsoft demo. So it really is actually truly a cross-platform experience that you're creating. Now, obviously, I'd like to say that it integrates seamlessly with Office 365, and Office 365, therefore, is integrating seamlessly with your add-in. This is important because as versions change, as things change in the environment, we try to make sure, and I haven't heard of an example yet to the contrary, but we try to make sure that there is always a compatibility match, so that we're always making sure that we are upgrading, our platform so that add-ins continue to run no matter what. And then finally, because it's so centralized, because it is so simple, because it runs cross-platform from one place, it really streamlines product life cycles. It's really easy to do updates. It's really easy to push one version of a add-in across all kinds of different environments. So there are a lot of benefits to this, obviously. I think the one fallback, in all transparency, or the one, the one Achilles heel, is that it doesn't necessarily always work in an air-gapped environment. So if you have a military application or something like that that needs to be offline, it may not be a solution that works for you. It does depend on connectivity. So I'll be, completely open and transparent about that. So as I was sort of saying earlier, there are these things that are just the natural characteristics of an add-in. Yeah, it runs with a set of APIs built with JavaScript. We're going to talk a lot, actually, about those JavaScript APIs later in this talk. The reason being, well, I'll get to the reason being, but the point is that's very important and essential for you guys to understand. Runs on any web server. You can use client or server-side technologies with it. So once you've built that web component, you set up a manifest, you publish that manifest, and it describes how it is that the application is going to run and interact with Excel. What it actually winds up looking like is, well, it may look like a set of add-in commands, and what I'm actually showing you here is a tool called Script Lab. We're going to use Script Lab later in this talk, and it's very easy to get. It's free, so if you guys want to go and play with it for yourselves, we're going to get into some detail with that. There may be dialog boxes that pop up, but most commonly what you're going to see is applications that are running in a task pane. And if you have done things like created PowerPoint presentations where you're doing things like formatting shapes, and you see that big window that opens up in the right side, that's essentially the same structure, the same format that we're reusing, with the difference being, of course, that you can then take that form and insert third-party or insert your own content into that window. So we'll show you an example of that that's very interesting, very cool, as we move through this presentation. So that's the basics, right? So I just wanted to level set. So we're talking about modern add-ins. We're talking about add-ins built with web technology that can run across platforms and are easy to deploy. But once you've got that in place, you now have the ability to do all kinds of interesting things, innovative things that I was sort of describing earlier. One of the big things that we're working on right now is the evolution of the function, right? Everybody in here at some point has used a function. It is a commodity in Excel, right? There is nothing fancy about typing equals sum, but it is something that we all do. And I think, in fact, because it's something that we all do, it's part of the language of Excel that we all understand. And building on this then becomes a very, very powerful idea. So the next evolution, right, is custom functions. And this is something that you can do with COM add-ins. I guarantee that this is something that people have seen before. But it's this idea that, okay, it's an evolution stepwise of a standard formula that you create using your own ideas, your own IP. Well, where we're going now is into this idea of actually using streaming functions. The streaming function idea actually allows you to create functions that not only incorporate your own IP, but they can also incorporate data from outside of Excel. So you can actually start streaming data from sources external to the program into a cell within Excel. What this really does, if I can sort of articulate this as a sort of a value, as a way of building value, is to say that, okay, out-of-the-box tools are out of the box, right? They're just what you get. Custom functions allow you to create a certain amount of IP that will, help you streamline calculations, et cetera, et cetera. But if you take that IP and combine it with data from either public sources or proprietary sources, you can actually create a lot of interesting insight and a lot of interesting value. And so I think that, as we articulate this idea and I start to show you these things, I really want you to think about this, right? This sort of building of value across something as simple as a function becomes quite a powerful idea. So I'm going to talk about some of these things, and I'm just going to give you some ideas, right? Because that's part of the mission of this talk, is to give you guys a few ideas as to what you can do. And then I'm going to actually quit talking. Well, I'm going to keep talking, but I'm also going to start showing. One of the ideas that you can put into Excel now is a bunch of Azure-powered functions. I guess the ones that I chose to put on this slide, and the one that I actually highlight here because I'm going to show you exactly how it works, is actually a translation function, right? So I'm actually going to use Excel natural language stuff to actually translate values in Excel cells, just text values, to provide new context for the kind of data that I'm presenting to people. But there's also sentiment analysis. There's all kinds of different things that you can do and bring those tools from Azure into your Excel spreadsheet as a way of, again, creating this very, very interesting value with the data that you're doing. Another thing that we've updated, and this is not quite as exciting as bringing Azure functions in, but we have definitely updated the way that you can do dynamic arrays. I'll show you how that works. It's very, very simple. But the reality is now that as a developer, you have the tools, or frankly, as a user, you have the tools to simply define spill ranges, whereas I think in the past you had to do things like hit, Control-Shift-Enter or something like that in order to actually set up a dynamic array. So we can actually see how all this stuff works. So there's all kinds of tools that you can play around with, but let's actually jump in a little bit and let's play with all of this stuff that I've been talking about put together. By using a very novel idea, which is this device here. This is called the Symbisa sensor from Hanha. It is a company that we've been working with. You just turn it on with the press of a button. It is connected to its own proprietary cellular network. So these guys bought a little tiny bit of spectrum, and they run it out of the UK. And basically, this device streams data back and forth between an Excel spreadsheet and the real world. So it's great for things like logistics. It's great for things like, well, here's a story that I was hearing the other day. These guys sold some to a lady who strapped it to her dog's crate for shipping it on a plane. And apparently the pilot had forgotten to turn the heaters on in the hold. And the dog got super cold, and she was really angry, so she bought this, proved to the airline that this had happened because this was strapped to the crate. The airline didn't even fight it. They admitted error, pilot error, didn't turn on the heater, and she decided to start a business using these things because now she's selling these to other dog lovers who are flying around the world. Strap these to your crate and make sure that they're actually taking care of your dog the way that you're supposed to when they're flying. So I guess what I can do is I can pass this thing around, but basically, once you've turned this thing on, it's connected to Excel through a custom function. Custom functions, of course, are logged in through add-ins. They run through add-ins. So in this particular case, right, I should now have data streaming. There you go. So data is now streaming. You can see the values are actually changing on here. And there's a bunch of things going on, right? So first of all, everything on this device is loaded through custom functions. And I can see actually my resolution is not what I thought it was going to be. But what you can see I've actually done here is I've just built a very, very simple dashboard to run this on that allows me to create effectively an IoT dashboard for myself. Now, this is for one device. I could obviously do this for many, many devices using streaming custom functions. And you can actually see that if I flip this thing over like this, the light bulb will go dark pretty quickly. I don't know. I'm under these very, very bright lights up here. Well, it should update in just a second. There you go. So that's very interesting. And then the other thing you can also do is you can stream data through it. So here, somebody have a device. Take a look at that. If you look at the front of that, let's see. What is your name? Okay. Hello. You might have to spell it for me. All right, so I type hello Rashna, and in just a second, if you look on the front of that, there you go, right? Okay, so the point is that Excel not only becomes a place into which you bring data, it also becomes a place from which you send data, right? So it's a pretty interesting idea, right? This idea that using these modern functions, you can take a device, and if you want to pass that around, Rashna, so people can play with it and just see what it is, it's this very interesting idea now all of a sudden that you have data coming into and data leaving Excel, so I can address you or whoever it is that this package goes to or whatever this device goes to. I can set up barcodes for logistics on this device. So the barcode would change, for example, if I were to just do something like this. Whoever has the device now would see that that thing is going to update very quickly. And I will actually tell you, it is not 0 degrees in here. I think the temperature sensor on that particular device is broken because I've been dragging it all over the world to do talks with. But what you can then see is that there's all this information now going back and forth between Excel and the real world. And that's really different. I didn't imagine anything like this when I started in finance. But the other thing then is that you can also, here's how it winds up working, right? If I want to figure out how these things work, if I just do this, you can now see that what this company has done is loaded in a huge array of sensor functions that address all the different ideas that all the different readings that their board captures, right? This is light sensors, both historical and current, right? This is humidity, this is all these different things, and there are also things like events. So if a box gets dropped or opened or something like that, there are algorithms you can set up using these readings to do stuff. So this is sort of the idea that Excel is really truly becoming less of just a place to do analysis. Not that you can't analyze all this great data, but it's also a control surface to some extent. So I can actually, let's see, I'm looking for light, and I want to, I guess the point here is that not only am I going to use a custom function, but I'm going to call an array when I do this. So when we built these sensors in, or these custom functions in, we actually predetermined that a spill range of 30 cells would take place when we do this. But if I do stream, let's see, light, I am going to do, history stream light right here. And then I can just, I need to go up here and get the device name, or actually this, because you can alias these devices. It'll get data, and then it'll automatically spill the last historical 30 values in. So that's the idea, I guess, if I were to go backwards through all the things that I just talked about. That uses the streaming custom function that brings in data from the real world, that uses that uses a newly built dynamic array to predetermine the number of cells that it's filling values in for, all with data coming from the real world. Now, the other thing that you probably noticed about this sheet is that the labeling on this thing is all in Dutch, right? That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You probably looked at this and said, well, up here in the corner, this guy's got a language drop down, and I can actually, if I want, translate this entire sheet very quickly into Japanese. It's kind of quick, right? But the idea is that, and think about this, right? In an environment like this device operates, which is a logistics environment, where you literally have these devices flying all over the world, and you're handing these things, oh, somebody flipped the device over or has been flipping the device over. So if you can see over here, I think my orientation thing is broken, but the numbers are changing as people are flipping the device around. So all these things are happening in near real time. But the point is this, right? You can take an Azure-powered function, like a language translation function, and bring it into Excel. And if you think about, I guess my favorite story about this is, I think there was a Mars probe that the Europeans sent, and it shot into the surface of Mars at about 15,000 miles an hour because somebody didn't convert meters to feet, right? And so those kinds of little things, even rocket scientists make mistakes in translating stuff. And so the idea that you can have a process on something as simple as an Excel sheet that might be used by a packing clerk whose machine is set to run in some other language than the shipping location started. And you can say, okay, this thing landed in Japan. Somebody in Japanese who's not fluent in Dutch or not fluent in English is going to need to know what all these readings are. I could set this sheet up pretty easily to pick up the language of the machine's operating system and make sure that when this guy looked at this same package reading or this same sensor reading, he was reading it in the right language. So there are actually these very interesting, very powerful scenarios. I must not have picked up that orientation thing, or there must not be a good word for it. There must be a good word for it in Japanese, but at any rate. So here we are. We're very easily capable of, going from language to language very, very quickly based on bringing the power of Azure directly into Excel. So let me pause here while you guys are passing the device around. Do I have any questions right now? I'll give you more chances to ask questions later on in this, but are there questions right now? Yes, in the front.
Is it a time series history that you have only real-time data?
Yeah. Behind this device, the data is actually cached, and in the coming months, we're going to be doing some more things around caching data and tying this back into Azure so that there is a way to scale. I think the challenge with a solution like this right now, and I can talk about this because it's publicly available. The challenge with a device like this right now is that you can collect a certain amount of data in Excel, but it becomes impractical. What you really want to be able to do is figure out how to bring data from all these different devices into a single database through which you can then extract data into Excel. And so that's completely what the plan is. It's just a matter of how fast we can get guys working. And with a small company like this, resources are focused where resources need to be focused right now. But that's totally the goal, right? The goal is to have a scenario where you can take an idea and prototype it and figure out whether it works without investing really a whole lot, right? If you have these devices, there may be $100 a piece or something like that, and you pay for events. But the idea is you can stand up a prototype very, very quickly, and then as you scale it, then you can scale into a solution like an Excel IoT Central or an Azure IoT Central or an IoT Hub solution that makes the possibility of a truly robust IoT scenario available without having to switch devices, without having to invest a lot of money up front, et cetera, right? I saw one or two other hands up, and maybe it's because I answered the questions that I don't see them down. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one question.
Yeah.
How long it lasts from one battery?
So it depends on how often the device pings, right? So if you set it to ping the way that it's set right now, which is basically continuously streaming, it'll burn down pretty fast. But if you're setting it to do something like a logistics operation so that it maybe needs to ping every hour or every 2 hours, it'll run for maybe 2 months. So it's actually not bad. The e-ink display on it is very, very lightweight in terms of battery consumption, and the information packets that it's sending out are very, very small. It'll probably get more efficient as they do things like move it onto more advanced networks, et cetera, but right now it's pretty robust. Any other questions? Yeah.
You said before it was running on GSM.
It is, yes.
Because I see GPS now on the sheet.
Yeah. Oh, there's.
Translation error, or does it actually have GPS?
It actually has GPS on it.
What happens if you say the example of putting it into a plane and it's flying over the Atlantic Ocean, which doesn't have a lot of mobile power?
Well, it actually, sorry, I'm gonna. It caches data, and then you can download the data off the device when you land. The devices are generally rated by different airlines to be safe, so it shuts itself off when it hits a certain altitude.
But that's defeating the purpose of actually measuring how your dog is doing.
Well, when you land, you can download that data, and then you know.
Okay, it's still recording in that.
Yeah, it's still recording. It carries quite a lot of data, and I'm trying to see if the Bing sheet with the location actually popped up on here. What is it doing? Oh, well, at any rate, the point is that if I click on that hyperlink, I should be able to get, wait, hold on, I know what it is. If I click on this hyperlink, that is where we are. Anyway, so when I ran it in the demo room beforehand, it actually did show exactly where we were. I probably should have just left that up so that it looked like I had done the right thing. But yeah, for some reason, it is not actually working right now. Okay, so the device is back there somewhere in the dark, obviously being held by somebody. Any more questions before I carry on? Okay, all right. So that is, so I hope then that this becomes an interesting case study for Excel and gives you a little taste not only of what Excel can do, but also I think where we're going. And your question was actually a very good one. the question about Excel as a collector of this much data or potentially this much data is a question that leads itself very, very naturally to this idea that storage of that data and interaction with Microsoft's other products like Azure are a natural fit. So let me get my clicker back here. Just to recap, and I think I keep recapping these things, but that's also to make sure you remember them. The idea is to create these reusable multi-platform functions that allow you to do anything, anywhere, really, using real-time data streams, using compute power from the cloud, either to store data or to bring functions into the Excel spreadsheet, and then also to use other cool stuff, especially like dynamic arrays. And the reason I think dynamic arrays become interesting is because when you're dealing with this much data and you want to bring this much data into the sheet, having parameters to control the amount of data that you're actually bringing in it's a nice tool to have. All right. So let's go then to the third part of the talk. The third part of the talk is actually going to hark back a little bit to what I said earlier about JavaScript functions. Excel is a 30-year legacy, right? Everybody speaks the language of Excel because, frankly, it's been around for maybe a generation and a half at this point, however you're counting generations, right? So we've all grown up with it. From a development perspective, what this means is that we have an enormous legacy footprint of Excel products, of Excel APIs, of Excel add-ins, and in order for us to make sure that we can drive developers and customers to these modern surfaces in Excel, we need to make sure that there is a complete modern picture, one that actually allows us to say that we can reproduce the functionality that we built over the last 30 years with our COM add-ins and with Excel for on-prem. We need to be able to do that in the cloud. And that's been a huge, huge initiative for us. The biggest thing that we've been doing is we have been building APIs like crazy. I mentioned earlier that JavaScript was the JavaScript APIs were essential to building modern add-ins. And for quite a while, the challenge that we had was that all of the APIs for the control surfaces in Excel that we needed to have to allow people to bring experiences from the past into the present, bluntly, they really weren't there. And I think that it is safe to say now to you guys that we are very, very close. I would even say we are there. The rate at which we have been releasing APIs and creating APIs to make sure that functionality is available, that is on par with or greater than what we have offered in the past, has clearly accelerated. So if you look at the hockey stick on this graph, this is our way of essentially saying we're making a huge investment of time, of people, of money into making sure that the Excel that we want you to build with today has all the capability and richness of the Excel that you built with in the past, and more. So just to give you a sense of this chart in a slightly another way, this is sort of a different visual of the same thing. We started with very, very basic stuff. You have to start with the most essential building blocks. But over time, we just keep adding piles and piles and piles of Excel functions or of Excel capabilities into our JavaScript APIs. Now, those of you that are Word, Excel, PowerPoint guys are going to say, okay, this is great. What about Excel? Or what about Word? What about PowerPoint? What about the other guys? I shouldn't say that because this is really not that talk, but the reality is that this is where we have made a huge, huge investment, right? And we'll catch up on all those other surfaces, I promise. It takes forever. Again, it's 30 years of legacy that we have to cover, but we've made an enormous investment, and we keep investing in bringing these capabilities not just into Excel and beta, but also releasing them into our GA environment. So let's go back to demoing a little, just to make sure that you guys understand exactly how rich the Excel API tool set is now. One of the things that, let's close this. You guys can keep that device. I see you passing it around back there. But I do want to make sure that we shut this down just so that I don't have multiple add-ins running at the same time. If you want to come back and play with that later. Let's talk a little bit about Script Lab. I actually have it up and loaded here in the background, but I want to make sure you guys know exactly where to find Script Lab. So the first thing I can tell you is that there's an add-in store here in Excel. And if you do a quick search on Script Lab right here, let's see, Script Lab, 2 words, hit the search icon, you get this. This is something that we built for ourselves. It's a nice little tool. If you're not a developer, it's a fun tool to play around with. If you are a developer, it's an extremely powerful little tool that allows you to test the JavaScript APIs that you're writing to for Excel, actually for Word and PowerPoint as well. It allows you to test those JavaScript APIs and do it right next to your work surface. So as you're building tools, as you're testing functionality, as you're formatting, as you're doing all the things that you want to do to your reports, you can use it to make sure that in real time, the code that you're editing is, that you're doing exactly what you intend to do, and you can actually see what it is you're doing. And this is also a great way for us to show you exactly how broad the surface of what we're doing is. So let's not actually install that because we have it here. Let's go to Script Lab. So Script Lab is an add-in, right? It is an add-in just like the Hanha add-in, except that it serves an entirely different function. You might even say it serves the opposite function. Instead of being a way of bringing data very easily out to people using devices, this is actually a way to create and modify reporting, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see right here that I have a text. I have a text editor. It has IntelliSense built into it. If you want to know about that sort of thing. It allows you to connect to GitHub. So if you want to share what you're working on, or if you want to use snippets from other people's projects in the projects that you yourself are building, you can very quickly download a bunch of different things and use them as the basis for the projects that you'd like to manage. So you can see then that I've actually got a bunch of snippets that I've gone to GitHub and saved, but also within this, there are a number of samples. So there are cool things that you can do right off the bat, right? There's all these different things that you can play around with. And what you can do with them then is, let's pick something. Let's say trend lines. I think that if you do this, you'll have to actually run this in the pane. You can very quickly, with Script Lab, run samples, right? So it's kind of neat, because not only can I modify all of this stuff and do things like add trend lines, whoops, I'm not right-clicking, and modify all these charts, I can actually go back and edit the code. So if I wanted to change and format the code to different, I don't know, simple things, change colors, change values, change names, change fonts, all these things are very, very easy to do in Script Lab. And let me see if I can actually just do this. I have, so let's see, let's find something in here just to show you. The trend line type is, get the color. So you can just go through this, and let's say there's the values. And so just for example, if I wanted to change 1088, which is their next change chains, I can do that. And then run it. It should just change that when it adds the table to 2099. But the point is, everything that I do right in here, let's go back. Yeah, so there you go, right? So now it says 2099. So the idea is that I actually have a tool that I can use to create reports, to play around with the JavaScript endpoints, and to really see exactly what I'm doing. It's a sort of a visual guide that puts everything right on one page. Now, I think the other thing I want to do is make sure that you understand not only can you do stuff like this, and let's delete this sheet just so that we have a fresh page to start with. We also have a lot of cool new things that we can do, and that's sort of the point of showing you things like not just samples, but, well, this is how rich it winds up being. Anybody want to see Tetris in Excel? We can actually we now have enough functionality built into Excel that you can run Tetris right within a spreadsheet. So, oh no, what is this? There's a bug. What is it saying? API not found. Oh, okay. So let me correct my statement and say we don't have enough functionality right now in Excel to let you play Tetris. But that's not really what the point of Excel is anyway. So let's run through some of the other stuff that we do have. So let's see, let's go back here. I think one of the things I wanted to make sure you guys got the sense is like how much, before we do this, let's delete all this stuff. Always better to start these things with a fresh sheet. So again, the point of this demo though ultimately is to say like how much information or how much formatting, how much power, how much capability do we now have in Excel for developers in particular. So if we start with, why am I getting, actually didn't make an error. I don't know why it threw that error out. But what you can see then is that we actually have the ability now to add all kinds of very rich charts. We have the ability to add labels. We can actually create all kinds of amazing charts now, including whisker charts. And I'm sorry, because it looks like the resolution here is going to mean that I'm going to have to move around a little bit to show you what's going on as we do it. But there is a very rich set now of charts that we can create, and the ability to customize all these charts and allow anybody, frankly, to create these charts is really, really rich, and it's really, really interesting. And it's really, really possible to do all this right here within a tool as simple as ScriptLab. Now, I think I've probably gone through a bunch of different things here. So the point is that with ScriptLab then, and I'll give you, actually at the end of this, I'll give you a slide that has all the resources that you need to go get everything that you want to play with yourself. But the point is that ScriptLab becomes this surface from within, from which within you can actually create your own charts, your own custom reports, your own custom Excel programs, and make sure that they're running the way that you want them to. So it's a very, very powerful tool in that respect. Okay, let's see. Why don't we go back here? All right. So another thing that's really interesting, another thing you guys need to understand is that with these modern add-ins where you can actually run them on the web and you can actually share them with people, all of this stuff that we're showing you is Co-auth enabled. Now, that's something that we work very hard on. It's very important to us. Obviously, Google does a brilliant job with Co-auth, and it's something that we feel is a weakness of ours that we need to correct. So as we move forward, you're going to be pretty darn sure we are making certain that, particularly in our in our client, or not our client, in our web version of all this stuff, that Co-auth is really working super, super well. So all these functions, if you wanna write to any of these functions and you want to Co-auth and you want to share, the reality is that we are now making sure that that functionality works as bulletproof as we can with everything that we're doing to Excel. There are some rules. I think it's fair to say that the last one wins. If everybody is working on a sheet at the same time, what you do not want to have happen is somebody who doesn't update the last update be the person that loses. So if you're the last person to update, your data stays. There are prioritizations in operations, and there are propagations across sessions. But that's just something, honestly, that those are basic rules that you would expect us to enforce, and so we do. All right. I don't know how I talked so fast through this whole talk, because it seems like I've really mistimed this. But I'm going to try, I guess, then, to just go through this. So I think that we have, at this point, I think we've actually, accomplished the goals just much faster than I wanted to. So I think you can articulate this expanded vision, right? It's this vision that Excel is a control surface, a surface that is influenced now by Azure, that will continue to be influenced by Azure and the power that Azure can bring to Excel. I think I showed a pretty interesting opportunity in the IoT device to explain exactly how this could actually be used to rethink some of the ways that you use Excel. And then, real world stories, dogs, I guess I can tell you some other real-world stories. I think that one of the things that people are going to start doing with devices like that is creating networks of sensors that allow you to bring not only the kinds of sensor readings that you see into here, but a whole world of sensors that can then be brought into Excel. So that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as all that goes. Stock quotes obviously come into Excel. You name it. You stream the data source, you bring it in, it will work. So this is probably the slide that you pick your camera up for and take a picture. These are the things that we would ask you to do. The first thing you probably want to do is you probably want to join the developer program if for no other reason it gives you an Office 365 tenant that you can use as a dev sandbox that allows you to safely test the things that you want to build. It's much safer, obviously, than building, say, on your corporate tenant. Get yourself Script Lab. The documentation for building add-ins is publicly available, as are all of our open specs for our JavaScript APIs, and then there's a site dedicated entirely to custom functions. If you have questions, we engage frequently on Stack Overflow and GitHub. We also have user voice for feature requests, and I will admit I think we're a little behind on reading back to user voice, but that's something that we are working very hard to catch up on. So I'm going to go back and ask if you guys have any questions. And we can have sort of an open talk from this point forward. So, more questions. Yes?
Is this housing to replace VBA and macros at the end?
I'm sorry, say that again? Oh, macros.
Yep. Is this to replace and phase out macros?
It's not to necessarily replace and phase out macros. And as a matter of fact, we're thinking a lot about how to bring macros into a modern environment. It is something that we want to be able to do. I mean, macros, of course, have been a security concern for people for a very long time, and we want to make sure that in the context of the modern application that we have what we need. So I guess the answer is a little yes, a little no. Any other questions? Yes?
Is everything in beta or just part of it and business can't really disclose? What is the expectation?
The JavaScript APIs are, for the most part, available in general availability. So there are the last, I think, 1.9 APIs are actually still in beta, and the custom functions are in beta, but I think we expect to release them into general availability very soon. Yes?
Do we have a REST service imports to Excel?
REST services?
Yes.
Yes, so there are a few. I think you can connect a little bit to the graph. That's probably what we're talking about mainly, right? So I think there are a certain number of graph endpoints that you can connect to, and you can use REST services, I think, for auth with Excel. So I think that's where you would get the overlap. Other questions? All right, well, maybe I was hungry. I don't know why I ended so early. Seriously, if there's anything else you'd like to know, please come up and ask. And in the meantime, thanks very, very much.
Thank you.